Alright, so we had looked at histograms, which is one type of statistics chart. The other one that we are going to look at is, let's go and look at what are called box and whisker plots, or box plots. So what is a box plot? A box plot will visually represent how data is dispersed in terms of our quartiles. And they're called a box plot because the representation of the first to third quartile will be with a box. And they're called a box and whisker plot because the two whiskers kind of represent areas of outliers. Anything outside of that is an extreme value. So let's go and let's throw together a box plot and talk about what's going on. So we're still using the same data that we had done before. We'll leave our histogram here. In fact, let's rename the sheet histogram. And then let's make a new sheet. And we're going to do a box plot of the data. So if we go to show me, look over here, what do we need for a box and whisker plot? 0 or more dimension and 1 or more measures. So if I go and look at this, notice that underneath here, I can't highlight it, but right underneath 1 or more measures, use at least one dimension or disaggregate the data. So we are going to end up having to disaggregate the data. So if I go and I look at my cost thing here, you'll see that the histogram shows up, but the box and whisker doesn't. So what we need to do is, let's go into analysis, turn off aggregate measures, and now you see box and whisker plots pop up, but the histogram does not. The histogram you need aggregated data for, box and whisker you need disaggregated. So if I go and I click on this, here we go, this is my box and whisker plot. And this will look the exact same way if you generate it in Excel also. So let's go, I'm going to rename this one really quick. We'll just call it a box plot. Now, what do we have going on here? So down here is the box. And if you highlight it in Tableau, you'll see a couple of the numbers for the box come up. So the important things. This bottom line here, the bottom part of the box, which Tableau will call the lower hinge, that represents the first quartile. So in this data set, our first quartile is 8.81, and since this is our cost, that means that 25% of all of the costs, of all of the data points that we have that are costs, will be $8.81 or lower. The middle line up here, this represents the median, which will actually be listed, so 1961. Half of all the data points are below, half of all of our costs are below $19.61. This upper line here, this represents the third quartile. Tableau will call it the upper hinge. So the upper hinge, or the third quartile, is $33.31, which is telling us that 75% of all of our data is below that point. So those are 3 of our 5-number summary. The others are the min and the max. And so in Tableau, it actually shows off every data point, so you can come down here and look. So the minimum value, just by looking at the graph, is something a little bit higher than 0. And then you actually highlight the exact point. It looks like the minimum somewhere around $1.50. The maximum value is up here, so the maximum cost would be 88.01. So right there, you can get your entire 5-number summary graphically. We're not getting the average and the standard deviation of this, but we really don't need it for what we're doing with the box plot. Now, on its own, actually, let's talk about these whiskers here first. So, okay, what is this big line that comes out here? What is this line that comes down here? These are our whiskers. And what the whiskers do is they really help you identify extreme outliers of the data set. Because just looking at this, it might be hard to see, but if you kind of turn your head to the side, if this is the median, half the points are below it, half are above, this data set's not going to be symmetrical because we have some stuff at the high end here. In fact, if we go back to our histogram, let's get rid of these here. Let's throw together our cost because that's what we're using. And actually, I don't even need to go anywhere. Just cost, show me histogram. You can see that, yeah, this data set is not symmetrical. It's skewed to the right. There's some high-end values here. So if I go back to the box plot, I know this doesn't represent a symmetrical graph. How do we identify outliers? Well, these lines help us do that. So remember, interquartile range, Q3 minus Q1. So in this case, it's 33 minus 8, so the IQR is about 25. The distance from Q3 to this upper whisker is Q3 plus 1.5 times the interquartile range. So we are looking at roughly 25 plus roughly 12, so 37. So that's why this comes up to about the 70. This one down here is the lower fence or the lower whisker. This would be Q1 minus 1.5 IQR. Of course, this one doesn't go as far because it stops at 0, which is fine. Anything outside of the whiskers, we can identify as outliers. So in this case, whatever this $88 cost is and whatever this $77.50 cost is, we would identify these as outliers because they're outside of 1.5 times the IQR of the third quartile. So this is a way that we can identify outliers by not being able to use that empirical rule. Now, this on its own, truthfully, a box and whisker plot of just one data set doesn't really help us all that much. Now, where do we use this? This is really useful when we're comparing different data sets to each other. Let's go and grab something to compare it by. I could compare it by customer number. I'd have to switch this because this really isn't numeric data. It should be up here in the dimensions, not a measure. So actually, if we go here, we can change it and say convert to dimension, and this would move it up. So I could use this to compare the different customers. There's too many customer numbers. That's not going to work very well. But let's look at the distribution of data by the date of sale. So we'll go drag this up into columns. At least I'll try to drag it up into columns. All right, so why did nothing change? Well, this is the year. Everything's in 1 year. We have to walk this down to the actual day. So plus to get quarter, plus to get month. There we go, plus to get day. And then I'll get rid of these other two by just dragging them off because they're not needed. All right, so now what I'm looking at is the date of sale, so March 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, but I'm looking at the distribution of data each day. And so this is where you can start comparing data sets against each other. Now, one thing that we'll notice is by our definition of outliers then, it's really just compared to the day that it was sold. We've only got one outlier now because we're not comparing against the whole set. But now we can start exploring this interquartile range between our 4 data sets. And we can find, interesting things in here. So there's some variation in this data set. I don't think anything's too wild, although this one here, the median, so 50% of the data is below this point, which is almost where this other data has their first quartile, where it's only 25% of the data is there. But we can kind of look at how the data spreads out between the different things. So box and whisker plots are great for comparing data and data distributions between data sets. Because remember, this is kind of graphically showing us our 5-number summary, and now we're looking at the same data, but it's been sliced into different days. And so this is how we read a box and whisker plot. And this is what all this stuff represents, and this is something that we're going to be using as we go forward, especially more on our analysis part. But so those are our 2 different kinds of statistics charts. So we have our histograms and we have our box and whisker plots. So now this is something that we're going to want to upload for engagement. So let's go and save this file. Now if I just go, this is default book 1, we want to give it another name, so we're going to go File, Save As. And I am just going to drop it back into my downloads folder. And we'll give it some name. I guess statistics charts would be fine. Now, by default, this is going to save as a Tableau workbook, a .twb file. Tableau only is going to save the instructions for creating the graph. So if you don't have the data, you won't be able to open this. So typically what we want to do, we'll click on Save File Type, we want to save it as a Tableau packaged workbook. That saves the data with it. So no matter who you send it to, they'll be able to open it up. Because if you sent me the TWB file of what we just did and I opened it up, it's not going to find the data. But if I do a packaged workbook, all the data will be fine. And so I save it. So all the data is now saved and contained into that, and we'll be able to open it and take a look at it. And this will be uploaded for engagement for this